Hey everyone, welcome back to Dissatisfied Philosophy. The video is a bit different today. I'm not going to be in the camera because I'm going to be giving a tour of the Hegel books that I own, kind of giving a brief summary of each, and maybe talking about recommendations for people that are just starting Hegel, people that are a little bit more advanced on Hegel and want to learn more. I haven't talked about Hegel in a while on this channel, but I wanted to do sort of a brief summary of the books that I have. Secondary and primary sources are split up. So let's begin with primary sources. I have them ranked as my favorite books to my least favorite. So first, it is the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, Part 1. This is a magnificent, necessary book to understand Hegel's system. Before you ever want to read the full science of logic, you really want to read this, because what this basically was written after the science of logic was written at the end of Hegel's life, and the whole point of it is to go back and explain more about what Hegel did not make clear in the science of logic. For instance, what you'll see a lot of times is it'll say remark under the under a part, and this remark or addition, it says, explains everything that is here in much more detail, right? So this book is necessary. Basically, these additions are kind of like you're reading a secondary source, but it's just Hegel going back and writing what he missed and what he should have said earlier. So this book is the greatest text that I own on Hegel. And I don't own a copy of the Science of Logic, but that would, of course, be my number one Hegel text. As any good Hegelian or person interested in Hegel, as I wouldn't say I'm a Hegelian, but any person interested in Hegel knows Science of Logic is the best text, and this is necessary to understand the Science of Logic and to truly get Hegel's ideas. I especially love the end, where you can quite literally see like how his mind thinking and how he reaches the end of what knowing is, and he reaches the end of the absolute idea, and then he goes, okay, now let's talk about nature. If I remember correctly, the last yes, so now here it is. The idea resolves to release freely from itself the moment of its particularity, or the first determining of otherness, the immediate idea as its reflection, itself as nature. And you can tell once Hegel wrote this, he immediately began thinking about part 2 of the philosophical sciences, which is the philosophy of nature, or Encyclopedia of Nature, right? So you can quite literally see his mind working at the end. It's the last thing he says, nature. And then he talks about his philosophy of nature in the next text. So it's just such a great book. I wouldn't say it's the first Hegel book to read, but it's really, yeah, I'll say it's not the first for now. So next, Phenomenology of Spirit. Absolutely wonderful book. This book has been written on so much, right? It's been written on so much. There's so many things you can say about this book. But what I will say is that I think my favorite section is probably the start of Spirit, when Hegel's discussing the difference between knowledge and faith, and how he believes you go from faith to knowledge, which draws on his earlier work, Faith and Knowledge, right? Pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, no, I mean, this is another wonderful text you literally cannot do without when you're reading Hegel. There is no way to read Hegel and not read Phenomenology of Spirit. Later, I'm going to be introducing a secondary text to help you get through it. The main idea for Phenomenology of Spirit is it's Hegel giving an archetypal understanding of history. So throughout history, there's these various archetypal characters, not like Jungian archetypes, but more like, yeah, we'll just say archetypal characters. And throughout different parts of history, they appear in different ways, but there seem to be like consistencies and corollaries. And at the end of this, once you get to the end of history, religion, well, once you get to absolute knowing, you go from religion to absolute knowing, which would just be the recognition for Hegel that all of religion falls into what he calls picture thinking. And to rid yourself of picture thinking, you must embrace the abstract, which for Hegel is philosophy. So, great text on, highly recommend, of course. Next, Philosophy of History. This was the first Hegel book that I read. What I'm holding in my hands right here. And by no means is it like completely like understandable. Certainly once you get more to the end, you get more ideas of spirit. You hear his ideas of the concept, the idea. The start of it is basically like a telling of history. I mean, Hegel literally like relies on historical resources of his time, talks about the history of China, the history of India, the history of etc. Once you get past that, that's when you sort of get to the more speculative, fun, philosophical aspects. It's a fine text. I mean, it's not my favorite. It's one that I would recommend a lot of people start with, just because you're wading into Hegel, but you're not fully diving into his system yet, right? You're sort of getting bits and pieces in this text. But it's a great text. I highly recommend. And you can find really fascinating quotes that show Hegel's idea of Christianity developing towards the end of his life, which in some ways has corollary with Schelling's own, I won't say return to Christianity, but I will say his sort of, some people call it like a Christian turn, where Schelling began to, I should specify, F.W.J. Schelling was a contemporary of Hegel and a fellow German idealist philosopher. And he, in his later life, had a Christian turn of sorts, and this led him to, we won't say become Christian, but embrace more aspects of Christianity than he did beforehand. I think you can kind of see the similar thing in Hegel, since this is Hegel's last lecture, I believe, ever, but don't quote me on that. It's one of his last lectures. Maybe not his last, but it's definitely one of his last. So, highly recommend for a starter text. This was the second text I read of Hegel ever. Introductory Lectures on Aesthetics. This text is really, really dense, in the sense that Hegel puts so much of a system into just these few pages that you have to have an understanding of the science of logic, of other parts of the system for this book to make any sense. Unfortunately, when I read it the first time, I did not have that. So I was quite confused because, knowing Hegel, he does not explain his terms that well in this text. But there are some very interesting ideas about how Hegel views like the development of art, and how the development of art plays into religion, how the development of religion plays into philosophy, and you kind of get a summary of that in here. There are some more metaphysical aspects, such as like what makes an art piece good, what makes a thing art. Genuinely, I think Hegel's aesthetic theory, his theory of beauty, his theory of taste, his theory of, not taste as much, it's more Kant. His theory of beauty, his theory of art in general, I think is actually really appealing. And there's only one recent philosopher, I can't remember his name, who actually works with Hegel's aesthetic theory and philosophy of aesthetics. Not just doing scholarship, but actually like trying to use it for a practical purpose. And I think that there is so much in this book and in the longer lectures on aesthetics, this is just an introduction, that contemporary philosophers of aesthetics should really use. Like Hegel emphasizes that art has to be done for a purpose, art has to be done for humans, art has to be done, things like this, that I think are really interesting. And while some stuff doesn't hold up, if aesthetic philosophers would read this text, I think they would be much better off than only reading Kant, only reading Hume, etc. Many people overlook Hegel's aesthetic theory, but I tend to believe that it is the core of his philosophy. And that is a very unpopular statement. But what I mean by this is that everything branches from aesthetics in Hegel's philosophy. And once you see this, you can't really unsee it. But to reach that point, you kind of have to read Science of Logic and Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences. But the reason why I rank this text under these is just because it's very hard to get into. And it's really not that enjoyable, but I greatly feel that it is the core of Hegel's philosophy. Last one. Hegel's early theological writings. Recent scholarship on Hegel has started to kind of engage more with this text. It really wasn't talked about before the, we'll say, mid 20th century, and people are starting to like kind of piece together the relation of this text to Hegel's later writings on religion. It doesn't seem Hegel was ever really fully bought into the truth of Christianity in the sense of Jesus being the incarnate God, Jesus being bodily resurrected. It seems Hegel has always kind of viewed this as a symbol for higher philosophical truths that he believes. And you can see the beginnings of this in this text. What Hegel does very well here, though, is he shows Jesus to be a Kantian, which is a very interesting reading. And a couple of scholars have picked up on this idea that Jesus is a Kantian through Hegel's reading. And you also kind of see an existential reading of Christianity, something that would later rival Kierkegaard's writings like Fear and Trembling and Kierkegaard's writings on love. A existential Christianity, you see the hints of this in this text, something that unfortunately Hegel did not go into much in his later writings, but you do see what could have been. In the words of Jacques-Alain Miller, when it comes to Lacan, you kind of see a second Hegel, right? You see a second Hegel in this writing that you don't find anywhere else, to my knowledge. So, highly recommend. And you can genuinely, I think this was the third writing I read of Hegel. You can genuinely start this as your first. It's super basic, and it's super duper basic. Highly recommend. But at the same time, you're not going to get much Christian truth out of this. It's not, yeah. So on to the secondary text. Primary text are here. First secondary text was a text that I read towards the start of this year and has absolutely changed my mind in every single way about how to understand Hegel's system. Gregory Moss's Hegel's Foundation for Metaphysics. This is a 2022 text. You see how much I've read it. Look at the bind. Absolutely wonderful. This book, you genuinely do not understand Hegel's Science of Logic unless you read this book. The way that Moss explains Hegel's ontological concept and how it ties into what in contemporary philosophy of logic is known as dialetheism, basically the sense that true contradictions exist. Put simply, a contradiction is P and not P. So the idea for Moss is that Hegel's absolute is a true contradiction. It is at once the totality of everything, but is itself not a being. Like it's the totality of everything, but it's not a being. So it isn't an ontotheology in Heidegger's sense. It isn't the totality of everything that is a being too, but it is just the totality of everything, all the while maintaining this sense of nothingness, because it is once the totality of everything and nothing, all concepts that could ever exist and all concepts that have never existed. Super fascinating in the way that Moss explains the development from the universality to the particularity to the singularity, which is laid out in Hegel's Science of Logic. Moss just explains it better than anyone I've ever read, and explains it not trying to turn away from ontology. He's not saying, guys, actually, Hegel's not an ontology guy. Actually, guys, Hegel's a big materialist. We'll see that later with Zizek. Hegel's a big materialist. No, Moss admits Hegel believes in an ontology, a strict system of systematic philosophy. That's a little redundant, but a system of philosophy. Hegel is a systematic philosopher, and Moss thoroughly shows this in this text. Moss is a little-known scholar. I believe he works in a Hong Kong university, but he is a great upcoming voice in Hegelian metaphysics, and one who doesn't just like do Hegelian scholarship like Stefan Holgate, but actually says, here's what Hegel believes. How can we add on to this? Oh, and the best part about this text probably is how he shows how Hegel's systematic ontology solves so many issues with metaphysics, both ancient and contemporary. He'll draw on Hegel's idea. He'll draw on Plato's problem of the third man that is laid out and that Aristotle mentions, and I think Hegel mentions, and Plato mentions it somewhere, where like, okay, you have a form of a chair, but if the form of a chair how does the form of the chair relate to the particular chair itself? Wouldn't that form of the chair then have to relate to another form of the chair, and another form of the chair, and another form of the chair, right? So this is, he shows fluently how Hegel's ontology quite literally solves these ancient dilemmas and modern dilemmas, such as the problem of universals and particularities. And when it comes to mereology is the study of parts and wholes. Everything is solved by Hegel's ontology, if you accept some pretty fundamental presuppositions. I'm going to move on now, but I love this text. It is so good, and I hope to one day meet Gregory Moss and be like, dude, you completely changed my view of Hegel in like every way. Like, I could go on, but I'm sounding too autistic at this point. We'll move on. Okay, so that's my best secondary resource I have on Hegel. My next is actually an introduction to Phenomenology of Spirit. It's called The Logic of Desire. It's by Peter Kovacevic. I think it's really enjoyable. I think it's really interesting how he views the Phenomenology of Spirit. I think it's a pretty common scholarly view. And just the detail that he gives explaining Hegel's ideas is so needed, especially when you get to the end, like when it comes to speculative Good Friday, as he calls it. And he ties not only does he explain Phenomenology of Spirit, but he explains how the ideas in Hegel's philosophy develop from Phenomenology of Spirit, and he ties in Science of Logic and other texts as well. Just a very good introduction. Sometimes when I want to get an idea from Phenomenology of Spirit, if I'm writing an essay, I don't even open actually Hegel's phenomenology. I just go straight to this and I parse through it and figure out what I'm looking for, right? So yeah, highly recommend. Absolutely wonderful text. Pretty dense, pretty dang dense, almost as dense as Hegel's Phenomenology, but absolutely wonderful and well written. Next is the Cambridge Companion Guide to Hegel, edited by Friedrich Baser. Baser is a pretty big Hegel scholar. If Hegel isn't his focus, he's more of a German idealist scholar in general. But this book is pretty solid. I actually think probably the best, I think, is this Pippin's? Hold on, give me a second. This might be either Baser or Robert Pippin. Robert Pippin's a big Hegelian. No, it's Paul Geyer, actually. So Paul Geyer's essay, Thought and Being, Hegel's Critique of Kant's Philosophy, is really good. It's one of my favorite essays in here. Geyer is a world-famous Kant scholar. And I think another really good one is it the Aesthetics? Yeah, it's this one. It's Hegel's Aesthetics, an overview. Who is this by? Robert Wicks. I actually have not heard this name, but I do like this essay a lot. Again, Hegel's Aesthetics, I believe it to be the core of Hegel's philosophy. I believe Wicks actually concurs with this, and I think that's where I first found the idea that aesthetics is the core of his philosophy, was in this text. I highly recommend this set of essays. It's not perfect. There are some readings of Hegel that I disagree with. I'm not a huge fan of the British Hegelian reading. Or you can, I guess the more proper term is post-Kantian reading of Hegel that Robert Pippin and Stephen Holgate and these types of guys engage with. And you find a lot of that here, a lot of like Pippin and Holgate and those types of readings of Hegel, very influenced by those guys. But at the same time, I think it's a great text to read, and I highly recommend. So, all right, on to the final two texts, and they are both Zizek. So, first is Zizek's reading Hegel. This is a pretty recent text, I believe, 2021 or 2022, and I think it's a good text. It's fine. It's a compilation with Zizek and a couple of other people. Frank Ruda's essay is absolutely wonderful on on Hegel's philosophy of nature. I love it. It's really, really good. I would say it's the best essay here, in all honesty. Zizek's essay is fine. There's some interesting ideas here. Zizek critiques Robert Bramden's reading of Hegel in The Spirit of Truth, which is Bramden's like 900-page exposition on phenomenology of spirit, tying it into contemporary linguistic philosophy and the analytic sphere of philosophy. And it's fine. I mean, Zizek, you know, when Zizek critiques someone, when he argues against someone, it's always like quite vacuous, quite, you know, I don't know. It's fine. I bought it, and I'm fine with reading it, and sometimes I turn back to Zizek's ideas regarding concrete universality in relation to political projects in his essay, but yeah, it's fine. I believe Hamza's essay is on philosophy of right. So the last text, Hegel and the Infinite. Yeah, this text it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Let me find my favorite essay in here, anyways. Oh, it's probably this one. Let's see, what's this one called? Yeah, this one's good. Infinite Restlessness. Yeah, this one's good. This talks about Hegel's theory of the infinite, and actually is one of the few essays in this compilation that actually talk about Hegel's theory of the infinite. This is good. It's a good essay. It's a good essay. Another good one, there was one about like South American Hegelians. I was super interested about that. Maybe, I think we're all in Zizek land now. Well, anyways, I can't find it, but there's also an essay in here about like Hegelians in South America and the development of Hegelianism in South America. It's pretty interesting, I guess. So, yeah, these are the books that I own related to Hegel, both secondary and primary text. So yeah, thank you for watching this video, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video around, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Have a great day.